Right. So welcome everyone. This is our first presentation, and I'm so happy here to introduce Ben Cerveny, amazing activist, people, entrepreneur, world citizen, name it. I think many of his ideas and the teams that are like the people around him are amazing, and he is promoting this framework, the standard for public code, that I believe is actually can be very useful for understanding what's behind things, understanding and helping also to organize our own way in which we develop algorithms, or processing of data, and everything else. So with that, let me just give this time to Ben. So Ben, if you can introduce yourself, and
Sure.
we go from there.
Uh, yeah. Again, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Yeah, there are a couple of things I wanted to sort of address, kind of as a stack of issues. The standard being one of them because it's our sort of primary tool. But in general, the Foundation for Public Code is an organization that promotes the collaboration between public sector entities to generate digital public infrastructure of all types. Projects range from we've worked with Ukrainian government to replicate their e-state application to Estonia. We've worked with the UK government to move things. The Notify project, which is their constituent messaging architecture, now is being replicated in the United States and in Canada, and we're trying to get them back to a merged state. And so what our thesis is that public code is a very specific type of open source that is very much can be considered an ideal sort of point for collaboration between public actors. I'm going to see if I can do this screen sharing thing successfully here. Where's my window? Let's see whether I can get to it or not. I might end up doing this. Oh, here we go. Um, let's see if this is working. Did that get you the window? Can you guys see this presentation now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great news. Um, right. So uh, the thing that I really wanted to talk about was this idea that, I mean, this is definitely all relating to the standard. The standard is a way of taking a piece of code that one is building for a specific purpose in open source in a municipality or a state organization and preparing it to be shared. And one of the things that we have really tried to concentrate on in the standard for public code, it has a lot of criteria in it that are very straightforward and things that you really need to do when you're preparing your code base to be replicated by other people. And that I think is a core issue that that organizations now are just beginning to understand, is that if you're going to build something in open source and you're hoping to maintain it indefinitely, you need to plan for replication in community, because the only way that you can sustain a piece of software like that, unless it's very small, is to have community input, because that piece of software as an open project, if it's something you're doing by yourself, it's always going to be more expensive than something you could buy from a vendor, because the vendor has amortized the costs across all of their other clients and will be able to sell it to you for cheaper than it would cost to build the whole thing yourself all the time. And so the idea of stewardship and the idea of collaboration in the public sector and open source is that you can form communities of practice around problem spaces, and then together, sort of as a continuous barn raising, commit to building and sharing code bases. And so one of the things that we've realized is there are two sort of actors in this ecosystem that use the standard for public code as a way to normalize their code bases to exchange with each other. And those two actors are the public administrations, and now specifically, and what we're seeing a lot in Europe and hopefully more in the United States as well, within the public administration, there is often a unit called the Open Source Program Office. And now this unit is the one that can, when a procurement is coming up, they can actually do the report for the procuring agency about where in the ecosystem there might be a solution that is a piece of open source that's already being put to use by another public administration, and they can reach out and have conversations with those people. And then the other type of entity, which I think is even more important going forward, is a stewardship organization. And that's the sort of organization that can be formed around a code base to have a governance model and to have a technical steering committee and to have a roadmap and a financial model. So the idea that you have sort of a there, because a lot of times in public procurement, you can't really, you can't convince decision makers, stakeholders to take on a code base as an operational piece of infrastructure unless they know that there's someone there who can help them out. And so, with the SLA, the 800 number they can call, like how is that a thing? And so the way that you can do that, provide that security for them, is to have an NGO that serves as the nexus for the various different public and private collaborators that are working on a code base. And that's the thing that I wanted to touch on a little bit today, as well as the standard. So, so the idea of public code is that it is both software and policy as a stack. And that's the thing that we sort of going into the digital transformation of the public sector in a way that's very different than the private sector. It turns out that the public administration is a code base already. It is a set of rules, a rule space in which the jurisdiction is operating, whether it's a municipality or state or the European Commission. And so those things are need to be coordinated in a way that we haven't really thought about before. And so the relationship between software and policy as we move forward has to kind of come into greater alignment and integration. And this integration of policy and software is one of the things that we've been concentrating on as, public code as kind of an approach. And so, like I said, open source, the vehicles that are built around these code bases that are used by different agencies in different places, they have all of these different capabilities and responsibilities to sort of show up in ways that a vendor of a big piece of corporate software, could also provide to. So in a way, providing kind of the surety that people need in order to move forward. So what the foundation does is provide a lot of this, the sort of framing infrastructure for the collaboration. So a lot of it is around building the communities of practice themselves, building the standard for public code as a collaboration, the set of rules that are understood, or I should say criteria, that are, we help code bases reach this set of criteria, which are things like, be well-formed documentation, have well-formed documentation, be containerized, all of the things that help with kind of the unboxing experience, one might say, for the second replicator and the third replicator. And then also building this community of practice that it continues to be the heartbeat of the maintenance of the tool and sort of the roadmap of how that goes. And so, we have these kind of rule spaces about, like, going back, the maturity model is one where we look at how close code bases are to implementing the standard and kind of move them forward. So we're looking at right now, the European sort of segment is looking at a couple of code bases like the omgevingsbeleid, which is a great Dutch word if you can say it, which is a really interesting one because that's one that's also been in consideration in Oregon around this idea of a unified spatial planning framework. And so this is where you sort of get into the idea that you can use pieces of software that are traded between public administrations as reference implementations to talk about the way a policy could unfold, right? The idea that the Dutch have come up with a unified spatial planning law means that a state like Oregon can, when they're exploring the idea of a unified spatial planning law, they can look at something like omgevingsbeleid as a reference and begin to work from there. So yeah, the Foundation for Public Code sort of sits in the space between these things. And the stewardship model is one in which we sort of spend a lot of time looking at the community, looking at the product, looking at quality, sort of the mechanism by which pull requests are pulled into the core code base. It's a set of activities that serve as this orchestration of a larger community. And the standard for public code is sort of the document that that kind of spells these rules out. I'm gonna give you guys a link to that. So, and the main thing I should say, about code-based stewardship in general is that it is about the community. That is the core issue of any open source project is, can you catalyze a set of collaborators, be they individuals or public administrations or private companies, to work together towards recognizing their common need for something to continue to improve, and something that will give them more functionality in the future. Everyone continues to sort of dedicate time and energy to the project. I'm sure many are familiar with this process, but the point is that something like the standard for public code is a way to create almost an API, a normalization of interactions between code bases and how they can work. So, the idea that all of this can succeed is based on a couple of things, right? You need to have someone in like an OSPO, or in this case, someone like Hector, who is there to understand the value of open source in relation to the things that need to get accomplished in the public administration. And there need to be people that understand how to build a project in that space. How do you actually resource that and move it forward, as an orchestration? And then the most important part, to be honest, is figuring out how to change the process of procurement, because you can make the best laid plans for how all this stuff could fit together theoretically, in terms of, we should all bring this software up to this standard and make sure there's a community of practice. But if you can't actually convince the controllers that they need to spend money in this specific way, and de-risk that for them, because a lot of public administrations don't understand how open source works and what they're committing to and how they can participate. There needs to be sort of a reform to procurement. And so we've also, aside from the standard, have started making these documents called process codes, which are about understanding how to enact some of these transformations to be able to better participate in the ecosystem of public code. And the first process code is about procurement reform, in which we had some input from some local people. So the resources that we're sort of offering up are the standard, which I've spoken about a little bit already, which is this this kind of we have both sort of an online version, which is now going to go into a community governance model. We have started it at the foundation, but much like all the code bases that we are helping to achieve this kind of longevity, we would like the standard itself to have its own vehicle as a governance body and maintenance mechanism. So the repository in which the standard itself sits, which is really just a PDF document, but is co-edited by many inputs, people, including governments in France and Spain, Stockholm, Sweden, Amsterdam, my organization. A lot of people have contributed, and that knowledge now can sort of live on and adapt based on what the needs are in the future. We have also the governance game, which is something really interesting, which I'll show you briefly if I have a minute, which is a set of cards which allows you to play out as a collaborative scenario building game a governance model for a code base that is going to be a shared resource between many actors. And this honestly is where a lot of these projects die on the vine, is that if they don't figure out a governance model somewhat early on, then some sort of entrenched behaviors sort of emerge, and then there's this sort of fiat governance by the people who have the sort of control over the levers in the code base, and sometimes that impedes the prospect for true collaboration going forward. And then finally, we have a podcast that's called Let's Talk About Public Code. We've interviewed some really great people that do a lot of work in the public sector around both on the administration side, people that have started OSPOs, things like that, and also on the stewardship organization side, people that run things like OpenFisca and DCDeem, which are two very successful pieces of digital public infrastructure that we've helped replicate. So the standard, the URL there, standard.publiccode.net, is we're approaching, this is actually a picture from years ago. I see now it's from 2019, which it was still version 0.1.4, and now it's approaching version 1, which is the moment which we're going to sort of birth it into its own governance. It will be sort of a product in itself at that point, and will go on to have its own governance model. But the point here is that everyone that uses this tool, it's sort of set up to talk to policymakers about why it's important to adopt the standard. It's toward sort of the management of the project spaces within government procurement and contracting, and then to the individual contributors, the designers and developers who are actually going to be participating in the sort of collaborative code-based project. So I would encourage everyone to go to that URL. I sort of didn't go through, line by line, but I'm happy to answer any questions people have about how the standard has been, how we arrived at the choices of what the criteria are in the standard, how it's been implemented. I have some stories about its use as well, but I sort of wanted to take a little bit of a step back and talk about the idea, the whole ecosystem of that we see developing between open source program offices and stewardship organizations, and sort of some of the tooling that lives in the space between those. And I think I'll stop it there and take some questions.